Liebe Kolleginnen, vielen Dank für diese Einführung und für die freundlichen Worte. Ich freue mich sehr, heute Nachmittag hier bei Ihnen allen zu sein und Ihnen ein paar Einblicke in meine Forschungsarbeiten vorzustellen, die ich in den letzten Jahren durchgeführt habe, sowie die Forschung zu umreißen, die ich in den kommenden Jahren hier an der PH entwickeln werde. Hierbei möchte ich Ihnen die zentrale Bausteine meiner Professur vorstellen, die auch Professor Leutwiler soeben erwähnt hat. Schulentwicklung, Governance und Digitalität als Megathema unserer heutigen Gesellschaft. Da ich erst seit einem Jahr in der Schweiz bin und noch dabei, mein Deutsch auf Vortragsniveau zu bringen, werde ich den Rest dieses Vortrags auf Englisch halten, um sicherzustellen, dass ich das, was ich sagen will, mit der richtigen Präzision und Genauigkeit sagen kann. Hiervor hoffe ich auf Ihr Verständnis. Das Schwierigste ist vorbei. Without further ado, here we go. Over the last years, researchers have become increasingly attentive to the broader picture behind educational technologies, or EdTech, and how EdTech has a major influence on schools nowadays. In that regard, research has clearly shown that educational technologies are not neutral, but surrounded by a broader political economy that comes along with very specific norms and values, such as the idea that good education amounts to personalized education. The political economy of EdTech refers to the analysis of how political and economic forces, including government policies, market dynamics, and the influence of private actors, shape the development, deployment, and impact of educational technologies on teachers, pupils, and schools. One example here is the emergence of EdTech brokers. They should be here. Yes, of EdTech brokers. Organizations that operate between the EdTech industry, public schools, research centers, and governments, guiding schools in the procurement and pedagogical usage of EdTech. Think, for instance, about Google ambassadors that go into schools to teach teachers how to use Google products. EdTech brokers are a good example of how EdTech has entered the schools and how many different actor constellations are trying to steer which EdTech should be used in schools and how. Teachers, principals, governments, companies, and new types of professions, such as EdTech brokers, all try to shape and steer how this should happen. In other words, the political economy of EdTech has become a crucial matter for school development. This is just a small introductory example to set the stage, but it clearly shows that school development, governance, and EdTech, or educational technologies, are tightly interwoven with one another nowadays. As a start, then, let me disentangle the two main components of my professorship: school development and governance. First, the concept of governance has originated as a counterweight to the more traditional concept of government. As we all know, the concept of government traditionally refers to a top-down hierarchical model where the state, national or local authorities, holds primary responsibility and control over education. Policy decisions are largely made within governmental structures such as educational ministries and behörden. The state, or the canton, is seen as the main actor setting regulations, providing funding, and directly managing educational institutions. Governance, on the other hand, is a concept that is used to signify a move away from this hierarchical and centralized model towards more decentralized, networked, and multi-stakeholder approaches. In education policy research, the concept is more particularly used to draw attention to recent transformations in governing the educational sector that go beyond the traditional state or the traditional canton. Examples here are the increasing importance of European and international perspectives and organizations in how we give shape to our school systems, the upsurge of digital data infrastructures that are increasingly giving shape to how teachers teach and students learn, and the increasing complexity of the already mentioned political economy surrounding education, with more and more diverse actor constellations involved than perhaps ever before, as the EdTech broker example clearly shows. Moreover, the key point here is that governance transformations are ongoing and keep on evolving, and that we need research that tries to capture and understand these evolutions. Second, the concept of school development. I follow research that is conducted in my own center here that has conceptualized school development as a collective and goal-oriented process that seeks to create meaningful change into schools. One way or the other, school development has indeed always to do with change. And we, as researchers, of course, have the aim to change things in and with schools for the better. I hereby particularly draw on a field of literature that employs a whole school approach towards change. In a similar way to the governance approach, the idea here is to see change as a networked rather than a hierarchical process that seeks to take into account as many areas of what happens in a school as possible. Institutional practices, capacity building, curriculum, community, pedagogy, and so on. Of course, in such an approach, change is not necessarily the same as improvement. And a great many things can happen before school actors actually are positive and sympathetic towards change processes induced in schools. The link between school development and governance, then, is that schools are no isolated islands in society. On the contrary, many actors seek to influence and shape what is taking place in schools. One of the most clear and significant places where matters of school development and matters of governance come together is on digital education platforms. Digital education platforms can be anything, there's a lot of them, it can be anything from a classical learning management system, such as Moodle or Blackboard, to recently developed platforms that incorporate and ensure an educationally specific and safe usage of AI applications, such as the Swiss platform Evulpo or the German platform Phobis. Both are very present in Swiss schools nowadays. As the infrastructural backbone of what is going on in schools nowadays, these platforms very much steer schooling as much as they steer the teaching and learning process. What is not yet fully explored yet in the research field, however, is how exactly these governance processes happen both in concrete educational practices all over the world, as well as the work that is going on in the background to make these platforms trickle down and operational. And this is something we can call platform governance. It is to this emerging fields that I aim to contribute with my professorship. In order to research platform governance and how it impacts specific schools, a topological approach is particularly helpful. The topological approach is a relational approach, which starts from analyzing the relations between the various human and non-human actors that are present in a specific practice. More particularly, topology allows to investigate how processes and operations of governance give shape to specific sorts of space and to specific sorts of time. Indeed, according to the topological lens, space and time are socio-materially constructed, and hence, equally something that can and should be researched empirically. A topological framework stipulates that classical conceptions of space and time are just one possible way to give shape to space and time. These classical conceptions we know all very well. They are, on the one hand, chronological time, and on the other hand, topographical space. Let me start with the first one. We are all very used to think about time in chronological terms. Chronological terms is characterized by the idea of sequential duration, where time is conceived in a clock-like manner, from minute, hour, day, towards the next minute, hour, day, and so forth. On digital education platforms, however, there are equally other sorts of temporal mechanics present. One example hereof are early warning systems. Early warning systems are based on learning analytics that track and log student activities into data infrastructures. The goal of early warning systems is to predict when an adverse outcome, for instance, a student dropping out, would be produced, and to subsequently prevent such an outcome from happening. As our research shows, such predictive analytics have great temporal consequences. They topologically bring the future into the present and govern schools in such a way that they are already expected to act on that future in the here and now. Moreover, various temporal logics, as you see them displayed here, might relate in synchronization with each other, or they might precisely clash with each other. For instance, the chronological time of the school year clashing with the topological and preemptive logic induced by an early warning algorithm. Topology, then, is a means to disentangle and research temporal governance constellations and how they ongoingly transform as new technologies are establishing themselves into schools. Something similar applies for space. We can think about space as something topographical, which means as something that corresponds to distinct geographical locations. The picture here, for instance, is a topographical picture. But I am pretty sure that most of you don't readily recognize what is displayed here. When I present the same picture, not topographically, but topologically, it is immediately a lot clearer what is being displayed here. The London metro system. This topological space is a space of connections and relationality. And even though this map might not be entirely correct topographically, indeed, it is not correct topographically, it allows us to see connections and to move ourselves in that space with a lot more ease. Topological presentations of reality, hence, make us do and see in relational manners. The metro map pushes what is not well connected towards the periphery, whereas it draws actors, in this instance metro stations, that are well connected into the center. Over the last years, a topological approach towards education has equally been developed in research. For instance, the global relations that are enacted by many digital education platforms do not merely connect distinct parts of the world, they equally perform new ways of seeing and new ways of looking at education, and in doing so, construct specific spatial and temporal regimes of understanding and governing education. In that respect, the task of research is not only stating that this happens, but equally, and more importantly, showing how this concretely happens in practice. To that effect, I have developed a topology-inspired methodological toolbox that allows us to research how platform governance is impacting educational practices nowadays. The toolbox is called the UDE toolbox, which is a shorthand for Interface User Design Ecology. The toolbox is inspired by the framework of topology in the sense that it allows educational researchers to investigate practices of platform governance as the continuous changing of relations and the relational assemblages more broadly that have no unifying essence, but that are continually being put together. It offers 4 methodological entry points that, taken together, allow us to analyze how platforms govern the educational sector in general and processes of school development in particular. The first entry point focuses on the level of the interface and tries to disentangle what exactly is going on this platform interface. The focus is here on what is called in the literature the environment of expected use. In which ways do platforms expect that and govern how their users behave? The second entry point focuses on the level of the user and asks what users do with the platform. This entry point starts from the contention that expected usage does not necessarily correspond with what is actually going on in classrooms and schools. Very often, the starting point here is an ethnographic one and starts from the very classical ethnomethodological question, what's going on here? The third entry point focuses on how a platform is designed precisely, that is, what is happening behind the platform. Indeed, platforms do not all of a sudden appear, but they are meticulously constructed. It is in that respect important to research how digital education platforms are not only carefully crafted and necessitate a tremendous amount of contextual, contingent, and messy work before the final interface is apparent to the user, but equally how they are in need of permanent maintenance and care. Investigating what lies behind platform design, for instance, allows us to research and disentangle which values, didactical ideas, and learning theories are governing contemporary education platforms. Last but not least, the fourth entry point focuses on what is happening beyond the platform. This implies to approach platforms not as a technical silo that is operating in a self-contained manner, but rather as embedded within a broader relational governance constellation that is co-shaping and co-forming the platform itself. This relates to what I referred to earlier as the political economy of platforms, and makes clear how platforms are always shaped in and by specific economic, social, and educational contexts, and the other way around as well, of course. Educational contexts always shape and enact platforms in very specific sort of ways. With this theoretical and methodological approach, it becomes possible to investigate the topological interest in how digital platforms construct and govern educational spaces and time. I will focus on one specific example here that illustrates both very well, the eTwinning platform. eTwinning is one of the largest teacher professionalization initiatives in Europe, if not in the world. It allows and encourages teachers to work together with other teachers in Europe, and to do this in very particular ways, in the form of projects. As our research on this platform shows, this has a huge impact on teacher professionality and on how teachers are governed to have very specific ideas about what a good teacher and a good school is or should be. Moreover, with a topological lens, one can see that it is not so much, or not only, Europe that has designed the eTwinning platform, as one would perhaps argue from a traditional point of view. Rather, it is precisely equally the other way around as well. The eTwinning platform designs a very specific sort of Europe and a very specific sort of European school. Explicitly propagating distinct norms and values such as Europeanness, the eTwinning platform thus creates a very specific sort of space. It is a space of connectedness where education is projectified and where teachers and schools are urged to professionalize themselves and further develop through internationalizing. Platforms not only govern educational spaces, they equally govern educational times. As I just mentioned, on the eTwinning platform, the primary way of working is in the form of projects. On the one hand, the eTwinning platform offers much temporal flexibility and allows it for teachers to flexibly construct projects in whatever way they see fit. On the other hand, however, despite this dynamism, there is never any substantive change in the very form of the project, which is always supposed to follow the similar temporal regime. As this picture here showcases, even though no claim is being made regarding what the specific contents of a project should be, and in that sense, projects are very much flexible, project activities are to be performed in a precise step-by-step manner, logically succeeding one another and applicable regardless of the specific project being undertaken. And in this sense, of course, projects are perhaps not so flexible as they appear on first sight. This temporal ordering of steps responsibilizes teachers strongly. If they aim to act professionally, they should first create, to only then decide, to only then agree, to only then inform, and so on, until they should finally and ultimately get recognition for their work. What turns this into specifically educational projects is that the topological projectification of time is expected to merge with the chronological time frame of the school in question. In other words, the careful governing of these different temporal rhythms becomes exactly a matter of school development, as they influence so many actors in schools who design and who do various things with the platform in very specific sort of manners. The example of e-twinning makes clear how tightly woven together school developments, governance, and digitality are, and how important it is to carefully investigate these evolutions from a variety of perspectives, in, on, behind, and beyond. One central question remains, though. How can we actively support schools in dealing with these manners? How can processes of school development help in making schools achieve, to use a common German term, digitale Mündigkeit? With digitale Mündigkeit, I mean here the capacity to learn to relate towards what digitality and platform governance is, and thus to one's school. Of course, fostering and enabling digitale Mündigkeit is far from easy, since it requires the entire school organization to participate in its development if we want it to be successful. Think back about the whole school approach towards school development mentioned earlier. In the remainder of my lecture, I would like to show how the creation of digitale Mündigkeit can be approached as an eminent matter of and for school development research, that moreover always needs to actively deal with matters of governance. The project I would like to elaborate on is called Smart Schools, which we quite fancily, I think, abbreviated as SMASH. SMASH is a cooperation between the PH and the Helmut Schmidt University in Hamburg. Instead of saying to schools how to do it, and in line with the broader philosophy of the Research Center, we instead embark on this challenge together with schools in participatory manners. The idea is explicitly to go beyond an instrumental approach towards educational technologies, and instead make these technologies a matter of collective concern and of collective design. When the project first started in 2021, instrumental approaches towards digitization were still very common, and SMASH aimed to instead engage with approaches towards digital school development that critically deal with and creatively respond to the wider socio-technical, economic, and planetary challenges of EdTech, its political economy. The overall goal of SMASH is to learn, together with schools, how to navigate different platform governance constellations, as I have outlined them in this lecture, and how to develop and use these platforms in ways that are pedagogically meaningful and sustainable. A first iteration from the project ran from 2021 until the end of 2024. Next to fundamental research results, the project equally resulted in one central transfer project, the Labcademy. The Labcademy is a platform for digitality-oriented school development that can be freely used by anyone interested. Since my time is short, I can only give one example here that shows the bridge between fundamental research and transferring those insights into concrete school development practice, the Lessing Yard app. For quite a while already, one of the schools we worked together with wanted to further develop an app that was making use of gamification elements in order to foster cooperative and social learning that could take place outside on the schoolyard. At the same time, the school equally wanted the app to be developed and supported with recent scientific insights and how to give shape to educational technologies in pedagogically sound manners. We applied principles of edu-nudging, and edu-nudging is letting pupils reflect on how digital environments are subtly governing their behavior through choice architecture. We applied principles of edu-nudges in our scientific investigations and the app's design, which we co-developed with the school, including the principal, teachers, students, process consultants, and a programmer, based on their communal vision. The app is at present as good as functional, yet at the same time equally being further developed by a group of interested students and a teacher. Because in the school, the conviction is very much present that more is possible with the app and that the school's vision can be even stronger incorporated into the app. To me, this is a prime example of digitale Mündigkeit. Learning to relate yourself as a school to the present condition of digitality through the participatory usage and development of an educational technology. This is just one example, of course, of the many things that were developed in the context of SMASH 1, and I warmly invite you to visit the SMASH website and our Lab Academy should you want more information. As a follow-up to the first project, at the start of this year, the SMASH 2 research project started. The goal of the project is to go one step further than we did in the SMASH 1 research projects and connect schools over the European continent with each other. The idea is very much based on our present geopolitical condition with many international tensions present, as well as on research that clearly shows that understanding and connecting with other cultures is of primary importance to foster interculturality, tolerance, and democratic principles and ideals. We call this transnationalism, emphasizing the topological importance of connections and interactions that transcend national borders and acknowledging processes of border crossing and cross-cultural interactions. Transnationalism, thus, can be seen as a form of school development that makes visible how platform governance can be approached differently by different schools in different national contexts. For that reason, in SMASH 2, we work with 6 schools from 5 European countries. The aim is to investigate with those schools if and how digitality-oriented school development can be deepened with and through transnational perspectives. As a starting point, based on ethnographic research that we are currently doing in those 6 schools, we are conducting a comparative analysis that analyzes the extent to which digitality and transnationalism are connected, and how this happens in various schools across Europe nowadays. Moreover, in SMASH 2, we are designing a platform together from the ground up with the help of a software engineer. The idea is to, together with schools, design educational technologies as something one can be actively involved in and give actively shape to. In order for this to happen, in SMASH 2, every school can start working what we have called proto-practices. Whereas prototypes, this is the word we all know, whereas prototypes refer to a first or preliminary version of a device from which other versions are developed, a phone or a car or a computer, proto-practices refer to first versions of a practice that schools can then develop further themselves. Proto-practices, hence, are topological tools of governance. They allow us, as researchers, to establish transnational relations between schools and to give shape to sustainable forms of digitality-oriented school development. In SMASH 2, we are currently developing proto-practices around VR, AI, and other platform design, but since this is still very much work in progress, I can only say for now, stay tuned, the research is on its way. In closing, I would like to conclude by saying that the interconnectedness of school development and governance, illuminated by the ever-evolving landscape of our post-digital society, demands immediate and sustained attention from researchers from a variety of perspectives and disciplines. As AI and other transformative technologies reshape education, we cannot afford to be passive observers, but need research that continues to show these technologies' intricacies and effects, especially when they trickle down into concrete schools. In the next years, my research agenda will continue tackling these issues, bridging fundamental research insights with practical solutions, empowering schools to navigate these complex challenges. My commitment is to ensure that my research translates into tangible, impactful strategies for schools across Switzerland and, yes, the world. If I would need to summarize my research agenda for the next years in one sentence, it would probably be doing research on, with, behind, and beyond digital platforms that help schools in not only just be ready for the future, but equally in actively shaping it. Thank you for your attention.